Hello, how you doing?
Hi.
Hi. Nice to see you. Nice to see your
Nice.
photograph.
There I am.
There you are. Beautiful.
Yeah.
There.
Well, nice to see you.
You too, honey. Yeah, and I see Paul has joined us. Uh,
Yes.
Very nice. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Hello. And Diego. Hi, Diego.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Cool. So, are we ready to go? Yeah? How are you feeling, Auntie? Oh, your mic's off, honey. Okay.
Oh, okay. I'm good. I'm good. Thanks. Yeah. So we're ready to go. Great.
Yeah, I'm just going to start my thing that I've prepared, and then we can maybe have some good discussions. I have tea. I have tea. I have pen
Great.
and pens. I've got a whole pile of things written down. So yeah, let's do it. All right.
Great.
Cool. Okay. So Nanti, thanks a million for giving me a chance to do this. I really appreciate it. So we're looking at privilege and inequality in social networks and eco-villages through the lens of a privileged activist, finding methodology that can transcend race and gender. So just to clarify the social networks and eco-villages, I haven't had too much experience of eco-villages. I have lived in a prototype one, you could call it that. And as for social networks, I'm going to use that sort of terminology quite loosely. It might mean social media and also community networks and things like that. So yeah, so to begin, I'm going to do a little bit of my own background and a bit of historical perspective. So the year I was born, 1972, I was born in Ireland, and it was probably one of the worst times of conflict in Irish history with Northern Ireland and the Troubles. About 500 people died, about half of them civilians. And so Ireland was in flux and was quite, you could call it poor when it came to European standards. The family I grew up in, my mother was a gardener, my father was a teacher, and I had a Aunt Sarah who was a nun in South Africa for many years. There was this kind of, you could say, I came from a sort of background of education, and one must do what one can to help people. That was kind of the sort of helping Africa was a kind of a theme in our family. I sort of grew up with pictures of Sutu men and women in my aunties and uncles' houses, and there was always this kind of goodwill, probably slightly patriarchal vibe going on there. So it was kind of like and I grew up Catholic, so it's kind of like this prism of good works. The Catholics were always, fundraising to send people and food, and helping Africa was a kind of a theme. When I was 9, Ireland also was going through this phase of, as a part of an environmental movement, the sort of mobilization of environmental sort of consciousness was happening in the 70s. There was a time where there was going to be a nuclear power station built, and everybody hit the streets. It was like the hippies, shop workers, everybody hit the streets, and it was called the Campaign Against Nuclear Disarmament. And I was 9, and my wonderful sisters dragged me on this march. And it was probably the most exciting thing that happened ever in my life, in my 9 years. But it also made me realize that the ordinary person you're allowed to have a voice in your country. And for 8, 9, that was kind of young to kind of get into that sort of scenario. So that was quite a cool big thing in my life. And then when I was about 12, there was a woman called Mary Manning she worked in a store called Dunn Stores. There was like a supermarket, and she walked out of the shop because somebody was trying to buy a grapefruit that had been imported from South Africa. And for her, her union had kind of made her a bit more conscious about what was happening in the crucible of apartheid, as Nelson Mandela would put it. And But she walked out and she refused to go back into the shop, and subsequently 12 workers left and went on strike, refusing to sell South African goods. And this is like a bit of a seminal moment in Ireland, where she was a cashier, you know, she was not, she wasn't an academic. She was 21, they were all young, and they felt like they had to make a stand for somewhere that was really far away, but for them, it was really important. And they went on strike for 3 years. It became a huge thing in Ireland. And in 1987, when they finally stopped striking, the Irish government banned all South African imports. It was the first Western country to do that. And it was a really radical thing. So it was that sort of thing of, it was sort of sitting there. I mean, I was 12. It wasn't like I wasn't following it with bated breath. I couldn't quite understand it, but there was that thing of ordinary people doing extraordinary change. Was really kind of moving. So I'm going to fast forward now. Thank God you don't need to go through my teenage years. And I'm going to go to the mid-90s, where I ended up at a place called Rustlers Valley in South Africa. So 1995, I had an introduction to permaculture. And I don't know, I know Paul is a permaculturist. Diego, are you a permaculture, au fait with permaculture stuff?
Yeah. More or less, my partner is permaculture.
Okay, cool. So I won't talk about that too much, but I'm just going to do it quite quickly. So permaculture, I got introduced to this as this kind of idealistic early 20s, wide-eyed sort of traveler. I got introduced to permaculture, which is sort of design systems thinking and using old and new technologies. And it was really exciting for me that there was ethics involved and principles, and it was sort of solution-based thinking for any situation, no matter how difficult or how lush full of resources it would be. So, and Rustlers at the time was like a prototype eco-village. We were very idealistic. We thought we had, like, you know, the values, new values and morals. We were mostly stoned, I would say that like this. Say that out. So,
no, it's the truth. It's the truth.
So there was a certain idealistic thing as well, of that we were this new wave. But the reality of the place was that the majority of people who were learning about permaculture and gardening there were white, and there was a small black village nearby, and we were sort of trying out our theories and our ideas on the land and possibly on the folk who lived next door, and they weren't as included as they could have been. And that is a kind of a tragedy in itself, that at that time the inclusivity wasn't really there. It just wasn't, that kind of consciousness wasn't properly there. There we were trying to be all inclusive of plants, but people were a whole different story, which is, yeah. So I suppose in some ways it was still quite kind of linear thinking in how we were operating. So from that, I ended up doing my PDC with Bill Mollison, and he just said, you know, you must get out and do it. So of course I felt this was permission from almost from God himself. He was one of the fundamental you know, people who set up permaculture. So it was like, he was the dude. And if he said to go out and go and spread the word, it was a bit culty when I think about it. I was going to go out and spread the word. So I did some really spectacularly bad permaculture designs and test drove bad systems. And I sort of fumbled through the next few years, but eventually I ended up building a house. And I don't know if I can put a picture up here. Can I put a picture up? How do I put a picture up? No.
Next to video, you see a green button that says share.
Yes.
So you can click that, and then you can be able to share things from your computer. Yeah. And also, if you can just slow down just a bit.
I know, I'm very fast. I apologize.
It's fine, but just a bit.
Can you see that? Is that visible? No. No. Okay. Oh, I've made you all disappear now. Come back, people. You're so lovely. Come back. There you are.
Yeah, we're here.
I will figure out the pictures at the end, maybe. So okay. I will slow down a little bit. I do speak too fast, and that's always been a thing for me. Facilitating permaculture courses, workshops, and things like that. Yeah, I will count down. It's nerves. Yeah, so I began teaching permaculture to large groups of people. I got hired to work for a company called Food and Trees for Africa, and they, hi Paul, I can see you now. They would teach large groups of, they would go out to mobilize large groups of teachers around South Africa. So in every province, there would be invitations to teachers, and we'd end up turning up to facilitate 3, 4, 5 of us, and we might have 200 teachers in a setting that we really wouldn't know what the setting was going to be like. It might be a hall filled with chairs. There might be a caterer. Worst case scenario, it was 40 degrees. There was a dead dog outside the door, and you couldn't get into the room, and there was no toilets. So it was very good training to facilitate in the long run. And what was interesting about it was that the teachers who came on the courses were getting a day off school, so they were keen, you know, day off school was kind of cool, but a lot of them were ecologically completely unfamiliar, and in fact didn't even want to learn about permaculture, because the soil was for poor people, and it was the status thing. There was a funny sort of divide. So we ended up teaching basic one-day permaculture courses to hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of teachers, and we got really good at it because you have to get better at it. It can't be boring. So we ended up doing games and dramas and costumes and getting people to stand on chairs and sing and applying techniques that we were never taught in some ways, you know, making up as we go along. But one of the main issues was that the teachers would go back to the schools and they would battle to perform, like put gardens into the schools, because they weren't necessarily equipped with the tools. They didn't want to get their hands dirty either. So I stopped working for Food and Trees for Africa, and I went on to other NGOs that had different ways of approaching schools and food security. It was all about food security. So we built outdoor classrooms with SEED, which is Schools Environmental Education Development, and the MMAEP, which is the Midlands Meander Education Project, which is based in KwaZulu-Natal. And they had different takes on it. MMAP, we did whole school sort of culture almost, going in and helping set up libraries and food gardens and herbs and doing art and drama. And SEED would build an outdoor classroom and create a whole culture of putting in windbreaks, food security, but being very regular about it, sort of facilitating and getting to communicate with all the kids at the school. And setting up this kind of central hub for the school where the kids could go to that was different. It was a classroom that was different, an outside classroom. So through that, I learned a lot. I started working with community groups, and I ended up being challenged by things like literacy. Like, you might have a group of people who couldn't read or write, and permaculture is very knowledge intensive. So that finding ways to teach through the challenges of socioeconomic disadvantages was really interesting and really challenging. And there was lots of aspects I didn't comprehend, that only now when I've stepped out of it, I can see where I did things right and I did things horribly wrong as well. There's definitely an aspect of that. So the things that I found that sort of worked were, again, things like puzzles and pictures and games and drama and songs and stories, and seeds were a huge part of my learning process. So I became a seed saver, and the seeds, I realized, once you lay out a whole variety of seeds, you kind of transcend everything, gender, culture, whatever it is. If you have gardeners and they have seeds, they just climb in, and you don't even need a language after a while, because it comes down to fundamental things that everybody can talk about it. If you're a gardener, seeds are like the basis. I'm going to then move. So I did all that sort of NGO work, and then I sort of moved out of the NGO world, and I ended up starting to meet people. And I just want to say a big thank you to a friend of mine called Inclaganipo in Zamande, who is a young black farmer from Mpopomeni, and he has challenged me probably more than anybody else, and he does amazing work. He's a farmer, he grows food, and he works with kids, but his main thing is he's a farmer, and he's part of a whole new generation of small farmers that I started meeting that were very grounded in the soil and growing, but they were also quite politically conscious and very quick to stand up and say what they thought was anybody being patronizing or not being inclusive. And it really started me, he sort of shook me quite a lot. And I realized that I had sort of slipped into a way of thinking that really was not missionary-like, but there was a certain patronizing aspect to what I was teaching. There was that thing of, I mean, I come from a background where I was well educated, and I did have all these advantages, and I was able to research stuff and play with it and build my own house and have access to funds and support from where a lot of people that I was working with didn't have any of those things. Their baseline starting point was so far below mine that I didn't really recognize that. And it's only now that I'm able to look back on it and appreciate the people that I became friends with and worked with, how hard they had to work to be able to operate in the same sort of sphere that I was operating in, and how hard I didn't have to work to do that. So it's been really interesting to have friends like Inclaganipo. We fight on Facebook all the time. He, as far as I'm concerned, comes from a very macho Zulu background. And so we have kind of gender arguments. But I think the fundamental thing that he's taught me is that not to disengage from conversation. And Facebook is a horrible medium that we engage in and disengage in. And the 2016 US elections were a real eye-opener in some ways, because everybody realized that you have a pool of friends, and everybody agrees with each other, and then there's another pool of people who are like mad right-wing fascist whatever, and they all agree with each other too, and the two groups never intersect, or when they do intersect they go, ooh, I don't like you, and they unfriend each other. So you can't tell what's going on, if you only stay friends with the people that agree with you. And so for myself and Inclaganipo, we go at each other on Facebook regularly, but we always end up going, okay, we have a difference of opinion here, and we're going to work through this, and we're going to still keep a conversation going. And I think if I've learned anything is from our kind of discussions, is that keeping the conversation going is one of the most important things. And sitting down in person and eating is another great way to set up a debate where we can learn from each other. So anything cultural like that, whether it comes to like, food, seeds, stories, music. I mean, Paul, that's your thing. All of those commonality, cultural things. We're all the same. We all love, we all grieve, we all eat. And finding those connections is where we're going to move into the future. So I have to just say thank you to Inclaganipo. I think some of your memes are revolting, but I'll tell you, and you'll tell me why you don't think they are, and why you think I'm being a patronizing old white lady to you as well. So I suppose now I'm in that stage where I'm doing a lot of self-reflection. I've gone back to study, and it's been interesting. I'm in a whole European setting now, but the one thing that I really feel that keeps my kind of hopes up are protests, activism and protests. So the whole Extinction Rebellion movement, I mean, there's just this fury, there's this like storm going on around us, you know, it's quite radical. And I'm finding lots of male permaculture experts in the field, they tend to be white and they tend to be well educated, have decided that they're going to go up against the Extinction Rebellion thing, and they're just vicious. Which I find very interesting. I don't know why they feel so threatened. I think that, you know, the conspiracy theory thing is really big and everybody's kind of, but I love protest movements. For me, I really identify with it because of the youth and because of that feeling of movement and change and ordinary people enforcing extraordinary change. And I think there's that has such validity in my life, that I can see it I can see it transforming everything. So I've also been really involved in just on Facebook Mind. I haven't got to the real life action thing of ecosystems restoration camps. And I think there's something that's gonna, I think they're going to really change how we view landscapes in the future, knowing that I could maybe go with a whole group of my friends and go and do an action, go to somewhere that really needs physical change and either help set up a camp. And you go, it's a bit like taking the concept like Burning Man or Africa Burns, but applying it to a land reclamation action, rewilding process. And so when you step away from that, you've left something that is really resilient. And some of the schools I've worked in over the years, I've gone back to them, you know, 10, 15 years later, and they would have been deemed a failed project 15 years ago because the gardens went in and we put in the trees, and 2 or 3 years later it sort of stumbled and it didn't work, and if I wasn't there pushing it, it wasn't working. But what's kind of miraculous is I went back to school in the Free State, and it's a tiny school, 20, 30 kids in the school, no water, on a rural area where there couldn't be any water, so the kids would bring water to school with them. And so we designed the whole school around the gutter system. So when there is water, everything gets watered, and when there isn't, it's just mulched and just left or whatever. And I actually burst into tears when I walked into the school, because it was this really resilient, incredible little system. And the vegetable gardens no longer worked, but something's dinging. Oh, hello. The vegetable gardens really had failed as a system, but there was fruit trees and there was bushes and shrubs and there was butterflies and birds and food ongoing, and nobody had been cultivating it. And I thought those are the systems, those are really resilient biodiversity systems that we need to kind of promote. And I've got great hope for that in the future. That's how we can make massive change. We don't have to live there forever, you know, in those sort of areas. So yeah, so for the future, I think actions like seed sharing and stories and feasts, and that understanding that there is no us and them, there's only us. So stepping up as an ordinary person to engender change and encourage change is probably the best advice I could give anybody, is not to wait for somebody to look after you or sort you out. It's not an option anymore. We need to really be extraordinary, even though we're ordinary. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to tell you. I feel like I haven't maybe addressed some of the privilege and inequality things, but I would love to start some conversations here. So yeah, here I am. Let me know what you think.
Thank you, Eidin. Wow, maybe we take a breath a bit and just like breathe in and you just like took us through like a long history, and it's like a journey. Oh, we've been in a journey, and thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah, I think I do have a few questions and things I would like to highlight and hear more from. But I would just like to ask how other people feel and any questions from the floor. Diego, Paul. So you can just, because there's not many people online, you can just unmute your microphone and then ask a question.
Well, it's really thanks for this, Eidin. It came at the right time. I was actually at a DiMartini discussion right now, and I got so bored with him saying, "Live your purpose and your value, and set out all these goals." And I'm going like, the things that I want to do are on the farm. So just leave this stupid lecture and come here. And I got home and turned on there. You give me this lecture on something that I really love and value, which is working with people, and here I am on this farm. Like when we chatted earlier in the year before you left for Ireland, I've been trying to figure out a way of working with the land and all the people that are leaving the rest of Africa to come into South Africa. And we've got so many Malawians and so many Zimbabweans and literally all around our farm right now. We've got informal settlements that are growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and crime is quite an interesting dynamic with the encroachment of how people are utilizing the land. And just listening to your story now about how you are, what you learned, just the simple thing of making food and having discussions and storytelling just like inspired me now with the food that I'm growing to actually just sit with the guys. Yeah, we've got a lot of Malawians in this area, and just start with a few and just invite them to come and eat the food off the land, and to just start, what it is that they feel, that they, what's going on for them. Because I hear you so much about the privilege, because I'm so nervous of coming in there and going like, this is how we're going to do it. And just going like, I don't know how to do it. I know I'm trying my best to figure out a way to engage the conversation, because it's kind of like an us versus them, and I don't want that. And there's this nervousness of trying to break through that barrier, because the laborers that are on the farm, they live their life and they connect with all the other Malawians in the area. But I would also like to know them and for them to know me. And, like I said to you, I wanted to do my music with music, but I'm so nervous of coming in too strong. So the lunches and the discussions, I just wanted to say that's the perfect thing, which I think it just rang, just my whole body was like, zoom, use that, something simple. So I would love, in terms of a question, I would love more on your experience with working with communities. Any suggestions that you would think would help with making that conversation easier, would make that that bond, development of trust a little bit more smoother. That's me.
Cool. Thank you for that. Wow, beautiful. That's beautiful to hear. I'm really inspired by that. It's a difficult one to know, and I guess the one of the keys you could look at is finding somebody that you really resonate, which you will probably finding somebody that you will really resonate, and asking them how they would feel from the community, how they would see a way to make it easier for everybody to be in a situation that's just different from the norm, different from the, oh, you're the white man with some land, and therefore there's a need and a want and also for you not to be in a position of, that patriarchal position. That's it's an easy position to slide into, of like, well, I can tell you what to do, sure, there's no problem, I have a list. So I mean, maybe it's that questioning, not necessarily me, but the people that you would like to relate to and create positive change with. I don't have any ins on this really, in some ways, other than set up the conversation somehow and be available And I don't know how your schedule is, and if you could do a regular thing where you sit down and have a cup of tea with somebody on a regular basis, so they can just talk to you and you can just listen. I think.
Yeah, well, I've literally, walking away from the corporate work that I've done for so long to really start walking this path a little bit more authentically, to actually really take it on. I mean, I do odd jobs which bring in some money, but like I really want to bring this in. So what I have started doing, yes, is I'm working in the garden every day. I get comments like, oh, so much work, there's going to be lots of food. And then like there's been a little bit of seed exchange, a lot of questions around that. But they're short little things and I often get laughed at, it's like, because I'm growing. The other thing that I noticed is that I'm growing European foods in South Africa. And I now just started making connections to a lot of the indigenous foods and going like, I mean, growing tomatoes in this climate, I mean, yeah, that's cool, but lettuces, they die, they frick, they go down quite quickly. So it's really trying to get in contact with what the actual land is needing in terms of those indigenous plants, but also having a little bit, kind of losing my words here. Just kind of trying to hold that attention a little bit more. And then I'm also trying to find a way of how do I get into their environment, because they have a cottage on the other side that they're living in. And I watch how they, they go out to the shops every day and they're buying Coca-Cola, a loaf of bread, and a full chicken, and then they get sick a lot because of the amounts of sugar that they consume. But I don't want to come in and say, oh, it's because of, it's like their choice. And how do you gently start shifting perceptions without carrying an agenda? Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you understand that.
I know exactly what you mean. It's
yeah.
I don't want to become the preacher on the pulpit. I've got to do
exactly.
I don't know. I'm Monty. Do you want to come in on this? I have a feeling you're like.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm just also thinking about Diego because he has to leave at 4. So do you have any questions, Diego, or anything you want to say before you go?
Hello. I also realized that it's also Fred that arrived later, that is also in the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Fred.
I don't know. I just read your WhatsApp like half an hour ago in the process work group, and I'm now like beginning to really focus on power and privilege topic in myself, my relationship, and also in my process work studies. And suddenly it's like many things appear as this meeting, and it's like a gift now. And also it's like in my day-to-day life, I live in the countryside in the midst of the forest with my partner and another couple. So we are all white European people, and my present privilege topic is gender in my day-to-day life. But it really touched me also this obvious, but at the same time it's this kind of obvious things that you need to remember all the time, that you cannot realize what's going on if you only relate with those you agree with. And many times, yeah, it's what I feel. I am in our piece of land, and yeah, we relate with some neighbors, and then I came to the city looking for other things, but actually I relate with the people I agree more.
I know.
And yeah, and so that was really important, something to remember. And about what Paul was asking now about this agenda, when you bring something you feel is important in order to change the world. It could be permaculture, it could be activism, it could be process work, whatever. And yeah, this thing about the agenda, I was feeling also some kind of answer in what you already explained, that you were growing European vegetables and realizing there's something about that. Even though you feel you need to bring something to the world to change, there's always something you need to receive from the world to change in yourself. So maybe it's from there, no? Like finding that place in which you don't have more to bring to the other people than the other people has to bring to you, or something like that. I don't know if you follow me.
Yeah, totally. But it's that I think in Europe, from a European perspective as well, and I'm now based in Ireland, which is a whole other mental head shift. There's all the challenges of refugees and migrants in Europe, which is going to just, with the way the planet seems to, and the way systems seem to be working out, it's just going to get more and more, that pressure is going to be more and more, like Paul is feeling right now, that there's this movement of people who want more, need more, and are gravitating towards areas that have more. And how we deal with these relationships are really, I mean, it's so important that there isn't that incredible divide, and it's difficult. You know, I watched a lovely program 6 months ago, and it was about Syrian refugees in Germany, and to try and create some form of cultural bridge, they set up evenings where they had a theme of love or loss or grief, and people would come and read poets, and there would be translators, and there would be food, and that created relationships between people. And I think, again, more things like that are the only way forward to stop the us and them, because the us and them is the biggest evil we're dealing with, you know. So how we go about it, it can be as fluid as we can be, as creative as possible, but yeah, it's a challenge no matter where you are in the world, and it can be us and them gender stuff, us and them color stuff, religious, you know, it's really it's us and them all the time, and it's really just us.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
hi, Frejan. Sorry.
Hi,
I want to welcome Frejan. How are you?
Thank you. I'm a bit late because we're almost flooding here.
That's fine. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I just want to say, yeah, thank you guys. I'm listening. I'm South African, and I'm starting also to be aware that today online, I'm the only person of color. So that's very and I feel like, listen.
People that, you know.
Yeah, it's very interesting for me to know, you know, because I look at my life as research, otherwise I'll die of ulcers because of the tension. You know, I live in a white world most of my time. And it's always intriguing for me to see the process of an average white person in Europe or in South Africa, where they are in the understanding of their white privilege, and what are the steps are people willing to take, or even how far they're willing to find the basic information of what's necessary to be done in order to bridge what Eidin was just saying, the us and them, because actually there is no us and them. It's an illusion. There's just one people, human race. And so how do we start the steps of going towards the healing of that illusion? yeah, so I keep hearing food, which really makes me laugh because this is just the center of Ubuntu, you know, the I am because we are. And that's what I will say to you, Paul, is for me, it's two things. It's that at the same time, working in understanding your position in the pyramid of being the white man, privilege, the boss kind of energy, and how the people around see you because you own the farm, and working on that and understanding and really being, it's a very uncomfortable place to be, and it's also challenging, but it's a journey that I always ask that people, white people, now we have to be clear, like white people, to start the journey of really realizing this and creating spaces of and finding information, and then finding ways of how do you connect with the other people of different cultures. And really food is the center, you know. Throw a party under the tree. Because I had a friend who was doing a project in a village in South Africa, and she kept asking me, but they didn't even want to come inside my living room. We were having a meeting. I was like, but you have a tree outside. They just came and sat under the tree. I was like, yeah, these are like really small things, but really important, because if you're going to have a meeting that concerns the growth of the community and you have a tree in your land and you invite African people into your living room, it's like a no, you know, culturally, but also feeling uncomfortable coming into, it's kind of like coming into my boss's house and now he's giving me, or she's giving me permission to sit in the living room and be comfortable. It's not gonna work. So there's like small things that also you just get to know, but so find an ally, you know, make a good friend, like Eidin was saying. I want to emphasize on that. Find one person or two that you really connect with, and they become your ally, and they start to teach you slowly about the culture and the secrets, and this person becomes that person that helps you to build the bridge with the other people. And yeah, I can say a lot, but yeah, Eidin, I'm ready, because I mean, I know you from long ago, and I remember I was starting to have this voice when I knew in South Africa. And I remember having a conversation with you. I don't know if it was Russell's Vedi, and I was like, do you know, Eidin, out of all my white friends, nobody has ever asked me once, how does it feel like being black? You know, how does it feel like being a black person? And a simple question like that is so profound and so important, because it shows that it might sound uncomfortable, but it shows you care and you actually want to know. You want to understand how it feels like to walk in my shoes, and how do I experience everyday life. And yeah, and I think also with permaculture, what I have found is that permaculture has become a very exclusive middle class, you know, the permaculture courses are so expensive, and there's this, I feel it's disrespectful because most of the permaculture knowledge is very indigenous. And so how do we heal that also? How do we bridge that gap of acknowledging that most of the permaculture work actually is from the indigenous knowledge? And now it seems like it's a middle class, white man, exclusive education. So I think also if you bring that, if you bring it in from that perspective to indigenous people, it becomes difficult. But if you bring it in a sense of saying, hey, how did you guys used to do things? You know, how did you used to plant your food and grow your food the indigenous way? And that way you're exchanging information rather than just saying you are there to teach permaculture. And I think the name should even change, actually. I think there should be some acknowledgement.
Yeah, I think, you know, you are so glad you brought that up. It's such a valid point. I'm part of a group on called Permaculture Women, and it's permaculturists who are all women from all over the world. And one thing that came out very strongly was that any of the female permaculturists or colored or people of color were furious that there is a real white male dominance within permaculture. And I hadn't really thought about it until people started. It's funny how you don't think about something until somebody asks a question and you go, oh, Jesus, you're right. Like Bill Mollison and David Holgram, I mean, they were seen as like these like superheroes, but what they did was they gathered indigenous knowledge a lot of the time and published books and became famous. And they didn't mention any of the people. They would say the Aborigines taught me this and the people from this island taught me this and they used to do this, and they, in a very, it was like a quaint it's like a quaint way, you know, like, you know, especially I will never forget, there's one diagram, and because I remember it, it was how the South Pacific Islanders used to tell which way they were going in their boats was to do with the temperature of the water. And so they would put some little bloke up the front and he would lower his balls into the water. And you could tell when it was chillier that they were going like in the right way or whatever. And there was this little, you know, cute little diagram and the whole thing. But I mean, that's a silly story, but it's not a silly story. It's actually, it's how people found their way around the planet. And that wasn't, it was very much a bastion of white male, you know, understanding, like, aren't we so clever, we put it all together and now people, here you go, it's all cyclical. But there was a certain level of, it wasn't that secular, it was linear in how it progressed as a movement. And from my position, like there were only white people on the first permaculture course that I did. And then occasionally from then on in, there was like a bit of a blend, and it was very much, permaculture courses were expensive to do, and they were, and they still are, but there are people doing them that are more grassroots. So there's a guy called, in Malawi, called Lueo Biswick, who I strongly advise all of you to become friends with, because he is an absolute brilliant, you know him, Paul, do you know him? You're doing this,
What's his name again?
Lueo Biswick.
If you could
Write it down on the chat if you know how to.
No, I have no idea how to do that. I'm gonna
Okay, write it down like this. Yes.
Lueo Biswick, Biswick. And he's doing remarkable things in Malawi, and he's, him and his wife and his child, see, I don't know her name. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, you see how it works? You know his name, but you don't know her name, and they're working together.
Facebook page, and he communicates all the time. But yeah, I'm now going to make a conscious effort to know her name. And there's also in Cape Town, there's the, I think they call themselves Gorilla House. They, as in guerrilla activists, guerrilla gardening. They do amazing training as well, and it's much more integrated and accessible, and I'm really enjoying what they do. And of course in Mpupameni, it's in Tombentla, Tambo, in the Mpupameni Conservation Group. You can, I'll put all those links up on my Facebook page, is probably the easiest way to do it. And yeah, there's a whole movement there with young Black farmers producing tea. And in fact, you know, there's a guy called Spamandla, who's fantastic, Spamandla Mbaso, and he's making indigenous teas. And he works with his grandfather, and they have a really nice little setup where he produces quite a lot of there. Yeah. Woo.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Eidin. I feel like, yeah, we're just coming to like close to closure. And I also wanted to say about the ecosystem restoration camps. There's actually, I know them very well. I think the first one of the first is actually in the south of Spain. And I know a few people who actually went there from the, some of them from the Ecovillage movement, Transition Network, who went to the first one and planted trees, and yeah. And it's also, yeah, a great movement as well. But also still, it's very much, you know, in Europe, it's still not very inclusive. in a way that
Yeah, because you have to have the money to travel there and the time to take
to take off. You see, this is the thing. And also I was going to talk about Extinction Rebellion as well, because it's also, it has been questioned a lot about its way of approaching when it involves people of color. So I guess this is why I do what I do. Part of my path is to just question the social networks and to say, hey, you know, there's another way of doing things. Just have this awareness that we are not repeating patterns while we saying we are creating the new world, and yet we still are the same people with the same type of thinking, who are actually, you know, starting this movement. If we don't work on ourselves and our way of thinking, then we are just going to be repeating history without having awareness that we are doing that. So we need to work on this patriarchy and also our way of systemic racism, if I have to say, or how we process things. Decolonize, basically. And yeah, so I don't know, Frejan, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, first of all, very interesting news story that I was late. I was in the Green Phoenix, and there it was also a big theme, the North-South dialogue, and there it was the South-South dialogue is also very important. And also a lot was spoken about trauma. There are collective traumas, personal traumas that play an important role, and healing of it. And one of the advices was, it was a bit of a, yeah, we were a little bit like, oh, what can we do? The world is still going in the wrong direction. What can we do? And one of the conclusions was, let's just be eco-villages and not get too worried about the outside world, but let's take care of our inside world. And that's maybe literally your inside world, but also as an eco-village, be an eco-village. Very important. So
I would question that if I
yeah, I just had my stomach went tight. I was like, what? Did that just come from the Green Phoenix? That was the conclusion of the Ecovillages?
one of the conclusions.
One of the conclusions? I don't even believe that was on the list then. I have a lot of work to do.
to clarify, to kind of clarify why I would question that is because I have been to a few different eco-villages now over the years, not too many, but I recently went to Cloughjordan in Ireland, which is the kind of main one in Ireland, and the Holly Sustainable Centre recently as well. And I found that Cloughjordan was interesting because they built it off an existing village that was sort of dying. So the village itself was rural little village, and it's literally off the high street. You walk down and there's a hostel, and what I liked about that, it wasn't a bubble that was away from an existing system. And I think lots of what are seen as eco-villages tend to be, they can be exclusive in the fact that they're so inclusive, because they're in a bubble in the countryside, and they end up in this, surrounded by quite conservative farmers, because they tend to be in the countryside, who end up with an us and them thing. They might get to kind of like them, but there will always be this fundamental resistance to the, you know, the crazies. It's almost like having a cult that moves to the countryside. And so a quick battle to find well integrated, because it's such a, create more of those, it's just more bubbles. It's like more of those Facebook pools of people who all agree with each other. I don't know, does that, that's
yeah, of course. We don't misunderstand.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I have to leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diego.
I
Ciao.
hope I see you. Bye bye.
Bye. Sorry, Frejan, you were saying something.
Yeah, please don't misinterpret it. It's the advice was that if you are an eco-village and showing a good example, it doesn't mean you become an island and just don't bother about the outside world, but it starts from a healthy inner world, which is your eco-village, and then go out. And maybe yeah, it resonated with me because our eco-village now is in quite of a mess. It's a lot of conflict, and we are not setting a good example at this moment. I don't want to go outside and say we know how to do it, and because we are learning to live in a community, and that's important before you start to improve the world, it's important to start with yourself. But of course, there are two big tasks. And one was, there was a beautiful graphic, well, how do you say that? Report. One end was inner goals, and the other one was outer goals. So at the far end of the inner goals was be an eco-village, and the outer goals, of course, there are also many things to do, but it has to come together.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid. I want you want your stomach to be in rest.
Yes, because I was thinking, no, I'm so tired.
Yeah, it's good to clarify that kind of thing of, yeah, there's only the only one way to change the world is to change yourself as well.
Yeah.
It's really, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a bit of the atmosphere. We are kind of desperate. We see things going so wrong, so we feel so small. And what can we do? So at least what you can do is get your own little environment in order, and from there try to do something good for the world.
How do you feel about that, Paul? Does it give a bit of inspiration, Paul? How do you feel? It's like in a world out of Europe.
Well, for me personally, it can sometimes feel quite isolating because I do feel quite lonely. Because if I start connecting with the other people, the white people who do permaculture, you know, I then immediately start stepping into that group mentality that I'm actually trying to break away from. And I totally get what you're saying now. Is for me to actually feel like I'm making a change within myself by physically going through the whole process of understanding the land that I'm working on now, which is filled with quartz. The soil is so hard. I take a pick to the soil and I go about this deep. All I've been doing is been pulling out pebbles out the ground to slowly start building a layer that can actually like sustain food growth. But doing that, I feel like I've been clearing out so much stuff within me because I suddenly realized how hard it is to actually start growing food. And one of the things I wanted to share with you is, I don't know if you've ever read Robin Clamera's work.
But I will.
Yeah, this book, this woman has totally changed my life because it's called Braiding Sweetgrass. She's from the States and she brings in indigenous wisdom and scientific knowledge. She's a biologist in the States. So she's half Native American and half white. And she's basically taken the whole dynamic between her privileged background, but also knowing her indigenous roots and realizing how much of her indigenous roots were suppressed, but how she's now blossomed into them. And like for me, I feel like this land, the more I listen and work with the land's beginning to speak to me. And now I realize that, you know, eco-villages have an ability, like you're saying, to pull in like-minded people. And I'm in the unique, you know, situation of trying to connect people from so many different cultural backgrounds, so many different languages, and trying to be able to communicate, because English is literally the only area or the only language I can speak, because I don't speak any African languages, and trying to find a way of understanding one another. And that's what's quite isolating and quite scary. And conversations like this are inspiring to just keep going and then maybe make one connection or another connection and slowly build the network to start making it feel like this land actually begins to help heal all the.
Oh, Paul, he froze. We lost him.
Oh, we lost him.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, and he was really, he was like there, he was saying really lovely things.
Okay, that's it, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's fun to, you know, the one thing that I didn't talk about in any of this conversation. Hello.
Oh, welcome back, Paul. We lost you there.
Hello, and then you disappeared on us.
What was I saying?
Picture of your face going.
Something really important and beautiful. You were
So
connecting the land, the people.
Yeah.
The soil.
So basically, to summarize, because I think that was a universal, hey, shut up. I think for me, just to summarize, it's really about to keep things quite local in my area. I don't really want to be like this global person. It's just like I feel such a huge thing for the people that are attracted to this area within a 5-kilometer radius. And in this 5-kilometer radius, there must be about at least 2,500 to 3,000 people that are crammed into this landscape, that are dumping all their effluent into the area, and that's getting into the groundwater. Their understanding of how to utilize the land is in a very, I understand, because people are so, we had people that, we've got this place called Absaville. Basically, ABSA picked up 400 Zimbabweans, Malawians, and dumped them on a piece of land here with no electricity, no water. They just dumped them on the land. And all the people in the area here just lost their shit. And I was like, these poor people, it's like, finally they've got some water now. But the first thing you see what they do is the first thing they do is they plant seeds. They build their house and they start planting seed. And it's just people who are just trying to get by in life, and to go, okay, you've been attracted to this area, why? What's the motivation? So anyway, I got to stop there, otherwise I'll go on forever. But yeah, just to kind of connect with the land and the people.
Yeah, it's one of those it's always been the human condition of the land and rooting oneself by planting. For me, coming back to Ireland was I did a lot of I'm now getting a lot of historical sort of backfeed history for why Ireland doesn't have the culture that somewhere like the Iberian Peninsula has, where there's these amazing agroforestry systems. So there's cork trees and cattle, and there's these systems that England has. England has, I've just recently learned this, but there's a thing called the Kentish Cobnut Association. So it's hazelnut trees, cobnuts. It's 1,000 years old. It's the oldest association in the world. It's 1,000 years old. And so people are like, well, Ireland doesn't have those systems, and why Ireland didn't have those systems. Ireland was colonized, and you weren't rooted. You didn't own your land. If you improved your land, you got higher taxes. And so it's a very similar scenario, just 200 years on in Africa. That same thing of migrant people being pushed off the land and trying to put down roots, but you don't plant perennial stuff. You plant annual stuff because you don't know how long you're going to be there. You don't know how long it's going to take. And that relationship with the land, once you start planting permanent species, then you become a permanent, your roots are more permanent. So there is a whole conversation to be had about that history of how humans interact and relate with their land that way as well, which has just been fascinating. But I know we're going way over time now, aren't we?
Yeah. I actually just got excited. Yes, have another round. I feel excited about that, so I'm just gonna write it down for one of the topics, one of the webinars, because I could just, when you just started talking about, because that's how we plant trees. That's how also in our African spirituality as well. No, you have a tree that belongs to the ancestors where you do your ceremony. So can you imagine people immigrating from Malawi, from Zimbabwe, going to South Africa and living behind those trees and family graves? That's a lot of trauma there also.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma there. So how do we make people then feel home where they arrive? If they don't even know how long they're going to be there, how do they get rooted? It's wow. Yeah, that's another topic that I would like to hear more. Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Eidin. We can talk forever.
Thank you.
And Frejan, I want to hear from you.
was here for
Is he
me.
from the Eco-Village? Yeah, what's going on? Like just a short closing of how you see this topic, you as Fredjan, but also what do you think, should be happening in the Eco-Village, especially in Europe?
In Europe. Well,
Yeah, around this topic.
I do not pretend I know all the eco-villages in Europe, but to start with my own eco-village, I think we can learn a lot from Africa, because we lost the tribal feeling, and we are individuals trying to make a tribe, and that is really difficult. Also because the trauma we're all carrying, and also that was Osman from Senegal. He pointed out that there's colonialism in Africa, but there's the same colonialism.
We know what you mean.
in Europe, you're also colonized, pointed out to us. So don't think you are not a victim of this colonialization.
Colonoscopy. Don't say colonoscopy. Let's say.
That for me felt, well, in a way, it felt nice. It felt more connected to the people in Africa, because we're in the same situation. Yeah, and also in this place in the Netherlands, it's very difficult to find land where you can grow your own food, where you can escape from all these rules and regulations and all these other things that make it difficult to start living in a tribe. And we have our, as I said, our trauma, and we really need to do a lot of healing in our group at this moment. This evening we have a meeting. Hopefully we want to make a step from fighting each other into more respecting each other's wounds and go the healing route. So that's where we are here. Yeah. We are over time. So there was one. Did you get a report from Green Phoenix? You heard what happened there?
No. I would like to. I sent you an email so if you can send.
There's a feeling like it's not going well in the world. Climate change becomes really, practical. It's a fact. It's no longer a theory. So from reports from all over the world, the effect of climate change is felt. So we all felt a bit depressed. What can we do? And so there was a big healing ceremony with people in the community. And during this ceremony, there was a knocking on the window. And that was, later we found out it was Osman. He was laying on the ground. He went to the toilet on the first floor. He locked himself in, and he couldn't get out anymore. So he jumped out of the window and he broke his leg in 3 pieces. So he crawled to the window and knocked, "Help, help," he said. So in the middle of the healing, yeah, it was dramatic. It was like Africa knocking on the door with a broken leg. "Help, help."
Yeah.
So it gave me some, it was very dramatic. And there was a fundraising done because he couldn't go back to Senegal. He had to stay in an expensive hospital. But it was a strange, not coincidence maybe. So, yeah, more about Green Phoenix. And that's in that context, you should see that let's take care of our own environment, as Paul was saying, and then spread it out. And of course, don't be blind for the rules. And as you said, Monty, it's really true what you just said. You said so many things. That's true.
I said so many things, but it's true. Well, thank you, Fredjan, for not disagreeing with me.
No, my stomach is quite in order after what you said.
Okay. Well, I think we can close now. And I want to say thank you. I want to say maybe also the knocking was not so much of saying Africa wants help in a sense. It's almost like pay attention. Yeah. Because I think we need to change the language, the idea of Africa needs help, actually. Yeah.
No, we need to help ourselves.
I have that written down on my piece of paper. At the top, I wrote, when I did my background and stuff, it was like, Africa, help, Africa, that was the thing. But by the end of it, I have down that, like, listen to Africa, listen out for Africa, because in that lies the solutions. There is our birthplace, our everything, the hard, the good, the ugly, the amazing, the magnificent, the tragic. It just, yeah.
So thank you. I feel like maybe we take just 5 seconds of just silence with our eyes closed and just taking a breather and saying thank you to this moment. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, Eidin. And Eidin is right now is in Ireland, and thank you, Paul is in South Africa, and thank you, Frejan in the Netherlands, and Diego is calling from Spain, and I'm in Spain, so ciao.
Thank you so much, Nanti, for setting this up. I think it's really magic what you're doing, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I really just, yeah, loads of love to you. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, all of you.
Over and out.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.